In my over 67 years of
Echo the
being
memory
on
of the
Earth,
lives he destroyed.
I've never encountered
So how do you
a
justify
real
your
incarnation
lifestyle?
of
I mean, your
Satan
watch could
himself.
probably feed 100 families for a month.
Devious,
This is not God's will for me to have this
murderous, a
face I have.
rapist,
Yeah, you can
and
take it
yet
away.
still powerful
He
because he
calls
can
himself
convince even
the
the
appointed
president
Son
of
of God.
a country
Millions call him
to be
pastor,
on his
but
side. The
behind the
only
polished
reason he's
sermons,
surviving
luxury jets,
is
and
because he
political
has the
handshakes
stupid
lies one of the most
followers
controversial
that
figures in modern religion.
try
A man accused of using his divine
and
image to build an empire of
support
fear,
an evil
exploitation,
person.
and absolute power. Apollo Quiboloy was
But
born in
here's
Davao City, Philippines in
the
1950,
repost
the
of
youngest of
everything.
9 children.
Let's see what
He
you
grew up
can
poor, the son of
think
a
of.
farmer, and
You can
claimed to have
draw
found God
conclusions
after a
of
vision in his youth.
what
By the
kind of
1980s, he began preaching
Satan
in
he is.
Mindanao, blending Pentecostal teachings with his own revelation that he was chosen by God to establish his kingdom on earth. That revelation would become the foundation of a global empire, one that promised salvation but demanded submission. He founded the Kingdom of Jesus Christ, a ministry that grew from a small tent gathering to a worldwide religious powerhouse with millions of followers across Asia, the United States, and beyond. His sermons were theatrical, emotional, and hypnotic. He claimed that God had abandoned traditional churches and placed his spirit solely in him. No one comes to the Father except through me, Quiboloy would declare from the pulpit, twisting scripture to center all faith, all loyalty, and all obedience around himself. And people believed him. The church built vast compounds in the Philippines, complete with luxury estates, private airstrips, and mansions filled with imported furniture. In the United States, his organization owned properties in California and Hawaii, run by loyal members who called him the Appointed Son. Every sermon was broadcast in high definition, showing him preaching to cheering crowds while quoting verses that reinforced his power. But behind that stage light, a different story was unfolding. Former members described the church as an iron cage wrapped in silk. Followers surrendered their salaries, homes, and even passports. Women were chosen to serve the Appointed Son personally, a title that came with privilege and danger. They were told that proximity to him was holy. Refusing him, they were warned, meant defying God himself. Behind closed doors, many were drugged, raped, trafficked, and held captive. Survivors say some were threatened with death or eternal torment if they spoke out. As his wealth grew, so did his reach. Politicians courted him for votes. Presidents called him a friend. He was photographed with the powerful, his image carefully crafted as a national figure of faith. On television, he preached humility. Off camera, he traveled by private jet, wore gold watches, and maintained mansions filled with imported art. The man who claimed to speak for God lived like a king, but no one defied him until his empire crossed borders. In November 2021, the US Department of Justice unsealed an indictment against Apollo Quiboloy and several top associates. The charges were staggering: sex trafficking of minors, coercion, and running a decades-long scheme that smuggled church workers into the United States using religious visas, then forced them to solicit donations for his luxury lifestyle. The money they raised, prosecutors said, bought real estate, designer clothes, and aircraft, all while Quiboloy claimed it was for the glory of God. According to court documents, victims described a pattern of manipulation. Female followers were allegedly chosen as his pastoral assistants, then abused under the guise of divine instruction. One said, "He told me it was God's will, that my body belonged to the Appointed Son." The testimonies mirrored a cult, not a church. The reaction in the Philippines was explosive. His loyalists flooded social media, insisting it was all a conspiracy by enemies of the kingdom. Quiboloy himself called the charges demonic lies. During a televised sermon, he smiled calmly and said, "You cannot touch the Appointed Son of God." His words were chilling, not just because of their arrogance, but because millions still believed him. While he remains in the Philippines, the United States has issued multiple warrants for his arrest. He has been placed on the FBI's most wanted list, accused of trafficking, fraud, and coercion. The Philippine government faces mounting international pressure to extradite him, but quiboloy continues to broadcast weekly, preaching about purity while condemning his accusers as servants of darkness. In September 2025, Philippine authorities confirmed that quiboloy was hospitalized under guard after being diagnosed with pneumonia. Officials stated he is stable and recovering in a government medical facility, awaiting further court proceedings. Inside his kingdom, followers continue to worship him. They kneel before giant posters bearing his face, singing hymns to his name. Those who try to leave face public shaming or threats. As of late 2025, the investigation is ongoing. U.S. prosecutors have gathered evidence from former church workers across several states, while quiboloy's network remains under financial scrutiny. Yet despite the mountain of accusations, he still commands millions, proof of how deeply faith can be weaponized when placed in the hands of one man. He once said, "The kingdom of God has come to earth," but in truth, it was never a kingdom of heaven. It was a kingdom of fear.
When you believe that He is the Son of God, you will do whatever He wants us to do.
In the Philippines have arrested a celebrity televangelist wanted by both US and Philippine authorities for sex trafficking.
I am now the owner of the earth. I am now the owner of the world.
This case is going to challenge everything you think you know about power, manipulation, and how far people will go when they believe someone is literally God. We're talking about a man who convinced millions of people that he was the second coming of Jesus Christ. A man who built a religious empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars and had presidents on speed dial. A man who claimed he could stop earthquakes with his mind and control the weather with his prayers. But here's the kicker. When the FBI finally caught up with him, they put a $5 million bounty on his head. $5 million. That's the same amount they offer for international terrorists. Wait, so I just double-checked, and turns out that's not true, just rumors going around. But there was a 10 million peso reward offered in the Philippines, and when they finally arrested him, it took 3,000 police officers, earthquake detection equipment, and a 2-week siege that had the whole world watching. This is the case of Apollo Quiboloy, and I guarantee you, by the end of this video, you're going to be asking yourself how one man managed to fool millions of people for decades, and how it all came crashing down in the most dramatic way possible. But first, let me tell you about the moment that should have been everyone's wake-up call. December 2019. A Filipino comedian named Vice Ganda is doing his show on ABS-CBN, the biggest television network in the Philippines.
I have a feeling it's quiboloy. The one who stopped the earthquake. Quiboloy is the only one who can stop Provinciano. Watch out for that. Yes. So what now? I challenge you, Quiboloy, to stop Provinciano.
Referring to a hugely popular series on their network. Now, most religious leaders would probably ignore a comedian making fun of them. But Apollo Quiboloy, he went on his own television network and made what seemed like an absolutely impossible prediction. He looked into the camera and said, ABS-CBN will be shut down in 4 months. Everyone laughed. ABS-CBN had been broadcasting for 67 years. It was the biggest media company in the Philippines. It was untouchable. In May 2020, ABS-CBN's 25-year broadcast license expired, and the government ordered them to halt their broadcasting. In July 2020, Congress, which was packed with Apollo's political allies, voted 70-11 to kill the network's renewal application. By August 2022, Ang Provinciano aired its finale online only. It wasn't exactly 4 months, but it happened. Was Apollo psychic? Did he really have divine powers? Or did he have the kind of political influence that could literally erase his enemies from existence? Because what we're about to discover is that Apollo quiboloy didn't just claim to be the son of God. He built a system of power and control that made that claim seem believable to millions of people. April 25th, 1950, Davao City, Philippines. Apollo was born into a deeply religious family that had migrated from central Philippines after World War II. His parents, Jose and Maria, were looking for better opportunities in the southern region of Mindanao, and they were serious about their faith. Jose was originally Protestant, but eventually moved the family into something called the Oneness Pentecostal movement. Think of it as a very strict, very intense form of Christianity that doesn't believe in the traditional Trinity. Now, here's where things get interesting. When Apollo was just 14 years old, he started claiming he was having visions. But these weren't your typical teenage spiritual experiences. We're talking apocalyptic stuff. The earth consumed in fire, the sun turning dark, the moon dripping with what he said was red liquid. Apollo was convinced he was receiving divine revelations about the end of the world. So in 1972, Apollo graduated with a degree in theology from what's now called the Apostolic Center for Theological Studies. And let me tell you, this guy could preach. They called him the preaching machine because of his intensity and energy behind the pulpit. But then, in 1985, he was under investigation again, this time for preaching what church leaders called unorthodox doctrine and openly criticizing other pastors as unfit and ignorant. Rather than face discipline, he walked away and started his own thing. On September 1st, 1985, he officially broke away from his church and took several followers with him. Together, they formed what would become one of the most dangerous religious movements in modern history, the Kingdom of Jesus Christ, the name above every name. Here's what's terrifying about charismatic leaders like Apollo. They understand that the bigger the lie, the more people want to believe it. Apollo started small, preaching to just 15 people in the slums of Davao City. His message was simple, but incredibly powerful. He was God's appointed representative on earth, and following him was the path to salvation. For people living in poverty, struggling with illness, or dealing with family problems, that message was like a lifeline. The Kingdom of Jesus Christ grew steadily. Their main cathedral sits prominently by the Davao Airport, a massive, impossible to miss statement of power and influence. Today, the church claims about 4 million followers in the Philippines and 2 million abroad, though those numbers are impossible to verify and likely inflated. But Apollo wasn't content with just being a religious leader. He wanted to build something bigger, a multimedia empire that would spread his influence far beyond the walls of his church. In 2000, he founded Jose Maria College, offering education from grade school all the way up to specialized medical and law programs. Think about that for a second. This is a man who's essentially running his own educational system, shaping young minds from childhood through professional training. He's not just recruiting followers, he's creating them from birth. Then came the media empire. Apollo launched something called Sunshine Media Network International, or SMNI. Before that, his church had been airing shows on local radio and TV stations, but now he had his own network. His flagship program, The Hour of Truth, was broadcast on major networks across the Philippines, reaching millions of viewers every week. Around 2007, his organization set up offices in California and Hawaii, establishing themselves as registered nonprofits in the United States. This wasn't just about spreading his message. It was about creating a sophisticated financial network that could move money around the world while maintaining the appearance of legitimate charitable work. And here's what makes this case so disturbing. While Apollo was building this empire of influence and wealth, he was also building something else entirely, a system of control and exploitation that would eventually catch the attention of the FBI and lead to some of the most serious trafficking charges. But before we get to that, I need to tell you about the first signs that something was seriously wrong. Came in 2004, when a mother filed a lawsuit. This woman accused Apollo's church of essentially holding her 19-year-old daughter captive after she joined the kingdom of Jesus Christ. According to the lawsuit, church members confiscated the girl's passport, isolated her from her family, and cut off all outside contact. If that sounds like classic cult behavior to you, that's because it absolutely is. The case was eventually settled quietly, with the court basically saying that since the daughter was an adult, she couldn't be forced to leave if she didn't want to. But looking back now, knowing what we know about how Apollo's organization operated, that lawsuit was probably just the tip of the iceberg. But it was what happened in 2008 that really showed just how far Apollo was willing to go to get what he wanted. Apollo had his eye on a piece of ancestral land in Davao that belonged to a tribal leader named Datu Domingo Diarog. Apollo wanted this land for something he called his Glory Mountain compound, and he offered Diarog about 20,000 pesos for it, which was basically pocket change compared to what the land was actually worth. When Diarog refused to sell, things got ugly fast. According to reports, Apollo's crew, led by a local official named Greg Canada, started harassing Diarog's family. They allegedly torched his farmhouse 3 times. There were even rumors that Canada tried to bribe Diarog's own nephews, offering them money to eliminate their uncle. Then, on April 29th, 2008, at 10:30 p.m., masked gunmen stormed Diarog's hilltop home and opened fire. Datu Domingo Diarog was struck with bullets to the chest and head and lost his life. His wife Emily was shot in the leg but survived. 4 of his children were wounded, including his 4-year-old daughter Mimi, but thankfully none of the kids passed away. The whole village fled after the attack, and of course the land value dropped dramatically. And guess what happened next? Apollo's church built their compound right on Diarog's former land, complete with armed guards patrolling the property. When people accused Apollo of masterminding the attack, he laughed it off, calling the accusations baseless. Meanwhile, local rebel groups blamed him outright, saying he had put a bounty on Diarog's head. Apollo denied everything, but the pattern was already clear. When Apollo quiboloy wanted something, people who stood in his way had a tendency to disappear or meet unfortunate ends. And this was just the beginning of what Apollo was capable of when he had real power. And that brings us to the relationship that made Apollo virtually untouchable for decades. Duterte and Apollo's relationship goes back decades to when Duterte was mayor of Davao City, the same city where Apollo built his religious empire. But their connection became truly significant during Duterte's 2016 presidential campaign. Apollo didn't just endorse Duterte, he bankrolled his entire campaign. We're talking about lending Duterte his private jet and helicopter for campaign events. Apollo also reportedly gifted Duterte multiple houses. When you're running for president of a country, having access to private aircraft and unlimited financial support is a game changer. But the relationship went far beyond campaign support. Once Duterte became president, Apollo became his spiritual advisor. Think about that for a second. The leader of a cult was literally advising the president of the Philippines on spiritual matters, and reportedly even on cabinet appointments. There are reports that government officials felt they needed to apologize to Apollo if they made decisions without consulting him first. According to former church members who have spoken out, Apollo allegedly offered some of his female followers, the ones he called pastorals, to Duterte and other high-ranking officials. One former spokesperson for ex-KOJC members, Arlene Stone, stated that victims were allegedly offered to people very close to Apollo, including President Duterte. Stone claimed that if Duterte liked one of the members of the pastoral group, Apollo would grant it. She also said that aside from Duterte, Apollo gifted other officials who were in power. These aren't just allegations about financial corruption. These are allegations about human trafficking at the highest levels of government. The protection this relationship provided Apollo cannot be overstated. For years, he operated with complete impunity, knowing that any investigation or legal action against him would have to go through a government where he had direct access to the president. When Duterte was mayor of Davao City, and later as president, he frequently appeared on Apollo's television station to promote his police-enforced campaigns. When Apollo was finally arrested in 2024, Duterte immediately retaliated by filing charges against the officials who had carried out the arrest. This wasn't just a religious leader with political connections. This was a man who had essentially embedded himself into the power structure of an entire country. And while he was enjoying this protection, something much darker was happening behind the walls of his kingdom. For years, the public had no idea what was really happening inside Apollo's kingdom of Jesus Christ. To outsiders, it looked like a successful religious organization with impressive facilities, a thriving media operation.
The savings are marching in during the Presidential Parade of Savings at Glory Nissan. All month long. New Ultima's $8,000 off.
For the world's best players, nothing beats lifting silver.
And millions of devoted followers. But around 2020, former members started speaking out. The first whistleblowers were women like Renita Fernandez and Arlene Caminon, who had grown up inside the organization and spent years working for Apollo directly. Their stories painted a picture of systematic exploitation that went far beyond typical religious control. Renita Fernandez described growing up in the church and being put to work as a fundraiser with strict quotas she had to meet. When she couldn't bring in enough money, she lost her status and importance within the organization. But that was just the beginning of what these women experienced. Arlene joined the church when she was just 15 years old. She started out fundraising, but eventually became what Apollo called a pastoral, a title that sounded spiritual.
When I was there, the first duty that I had was to serve this called spiritual. I will bring food for them. I will wash all their clothes, including their underwear. I will clean up their bedrooms, and then at night I will give them massages until they're satisfied, and they will tell me, okay, now you can sleep. During that time, while I was massaging them, the strange thing that struck me is two of them asked me the same question, if I was still a virgin. I was young, I was like, yes, I don't have any experience with any man because I was 15 years old when I know the ministry. I was 16 years old when I joined as a full-time worker. They then introduced me to become pastoral. I bring food for Pastor Quiboloy. I wash his clothes, iron his clothes, everything that's related to him. That's what my duty.
According to the FBI and multiple witness testimonies, pastorals were young women and girls, some as young as 12, who were selected to be Apollo's personal assistants. But according to federal prosecutors, they were also coerced into providing intimate services to Apollo in what was euphemistically called night duty. Let me be clear about what we're talking about here. The FBI alleges that from 2002 to at least 2018, Apollo and his church leaders systematically selected girls and young women. Some of these victims were minors. According to the federal indictment, church leaders told these girls and young women that having relations with Apollo was God's will. They were threatened with physical and verbal abuse and told they would face eternal damnation if they didn't comply. The girls were forced to write commitment letters pledging to devote their lives and bodies to Apollo as the appointed Son of God.
And suddenly he started to move my hands to put on his, he said massage here, and I said, oh my God, okay, and I massaged. And after that, little by little, he just turned to me and he removed my clothes, and I even can, because I was very shocked, I was like, I cannot explain, because I was nervous. This is what happened. He just removed my clothes and have...
We went there every week. We have to go. There's like schedule for every girl that you have to be there. Every time
One pastoral said that before she went into the Son of God's room, she was told to shower, wash her hair with the violet palmolive shampoo, put on lotion, and spray herself with enchanted body mist from Bath and Body Works, Quiboloy's favorite scent. The pastorals who performed their duties well were rewarded with privileges like trips to Disneyland, flights in private jets, use of cell phones, and yearly monetary payments called honorariums. Philippine police officials investigating Apollo told senators that up to 200 women may have been victimized by him over many years, with 68 confirmed victims of abuse identified so far. But the abuse wasn't limited to the Philippines. Apollo was running a parallel operation in the United States. Starting around 2007, Apollo's organization began sending church members to the United States on what prosecutors say were fraudulent visas. These workers were told they were coming to America to do God's work. But the reality was very different. According to the FBI, these workers were forced to solicit money on the streets of major American cities: Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, for what prosecutors call a bogus charity called the Children's Joy Foundation, based in Glendale, California. The workers would tell people on the street that their donations would go to help children in poverty, but according to federal prosecutors, that money was actually being funneled directly back to Apollo's church in the Philippines to finance church operations and what they describe as the lavish lifestyles of its leaders. The FBI says Apollo's organization kept detailed spreadsheets tracking workers sent to different American cities, monitoring how much money each person brought in daily, and tracking their immigration status. This wasn't some small-time scam. This was an international trafficking operation with sophisticated record-keeping and management. The conditions these workers faced were brutal. According to the federal indictment, they were forced to work very long hours, often sleeping in cars overnight, without normal access to medicine or adequate clothing. When they couldn't meet their fundraising quotas, they faced punishment and abuse. Many of these workers had their passports and immigration papers confiscated by church leaders. Some were forced into fake marriages with fellow church workers to help them stay in the United States year-round. Others were put on fraudulent student visas, with the church paying their tuitions as a cover for their real purpose. The money these workers raised made its way back to the Philippines in various ways. Sometimes it was wire transfers. Sometimes workers would carry cash, as much as 9,000 rolled up in socks in their luggage, but sometimes the amounts were much larger. Some of the women brought to the United States were also being exploited in the same pastoral system that was operating in the Philippines. One woman was allegedly sent to buy medication for intimate dysfunction. In January 2022, the FBI placed him on their most wanted list. Apollo's response to the US charges was predictable. He denied everything and claimed it was all a conspiracy against him and his church. He refused to face US authorities and remained in the Philippines. While Apollo was dealing with FBI charges and international pressure, things were also heating up domestically. The Philippine National Police launched a formal manhunt for the man who had once seemed untouchable. Apollo was believed to be hiding inside Prayer Mountain, a 30-hectare compound in Davao City that served as his stronghold. This wasn't just a church, it was a fortress, complete with hidden tunnels, secret chambers, and a loyal inner circle committed to protecting their leader at all costs. The first major operation came on June 10th, 2024, when authorities launched simultaneous raids at 4 a.m., but Apollo wasn't found. The political reaction was swift and telling. Former President Duterte called the raid overkill and a misuse of force. Senator Robin Padilla filed a resolution calling for an investigation into police conduct, but the police weren't giving up. Then came August 24th, 2024. Police launched a massive operation at the KOJC compound in Davao City, and this time they weren't taking any chances. We're talking about over 3,000 police officers deployed to a single location, but Apollo's followers were ready for them. Hundreds of KOJC members formed human barricades to block the search attempts. They linked arms, sang hymns, and physically prevented police from entering certain areas of the compound. After 2 weeks of this incredible standoff, something changed. On September 8, 2024, Apollo Quiboloy finally surrendered to authorities. According to the Philippine National Police, Apollo was given a 24-hour ultimatum, and he chose to surrender rather than face the consequences of continued resistance. He was handed over to the Intelligence Service of the Armed Forces of the Philippines and then transferred to Camp Crame in Quezon City. But even in defeat, Apollo's political connections continued to protect him in some ways. Former President Duterte immediately retaliated against the officials who had carried out the arrest, filing charges against Interior Secretary Ben-Hur Abalos and PNP Chief General Rommel Marble for what he called malicious mischief, grave misconduct, and abuse of authority. Secretary Abalos fired back, filing counter-affidavits and stating that while he didn't personally plan the raids, he stood by the operation. While Apollo was sitting in jail facing trafficking and abuse charges, he decided to run for the Philippine Senate. His campaign officially launched on February 11, 2025, from jail. His platform focused on fighting corruption and boosting national security, and he even proposed bringing back capital punishment for corrupt politicians. The irony was apparently lost on him. When the election results came in, Apollo finished 31st out of all candidates, well outside the top 12 needed to win a Senate seat. But in typical fashion, he didn't accept the results. He called for a manual recount, claiming issues with overvoting, ballot reading errors, and other irregularities. As of 2025, Apollo Quiboloy remains behind bars. His health has become a factor in delaying court proceedings. In November 2024, his legal team requested a medical furlough, claiming he had an infection in his dental implants. Despite his legal troubles, Apollo's media empire continues to operate, though without their founders' regular appearances. The Kingdom of Jesus Christ still claims millions of followers, though it's unclear how many remain loyal now that their leader is behind bars. But perhaps the most significant development is that victims are continuing to come forward. The Philippine investigation identified 68 confirmed victims of abuse, but police believe the actual number could be as high as 200 women who were victimized over many years. In the United States, the federal case continues to move forward. Apollo faces the possibility of life in prison if he's ever extradited and convicted on the trafficking charges.